Yes, hello and welcome back to the PE Insights podcast, brought to you by the fantastic team at PE Scholar. It's me, your host Nathan, and I hope you're looking forward to today's episode. Apologies for the slight delay on this one. I'm away in Bournemouth at the minute, watching some of our trainees in practice. Really good time of the year for me. But let's get into today's episode. It's a conversation with Dr Will Patz. Will has recently completed a PhD on the affective domain in PE and what that means for PE teachers. And in today's episode, we explore that in a bit more detail, whilst looking at how it can influence our curriculum design. Will is the head of early years and lower school PE at an international school in Singapore. Lots of insights, really reflective episode. Hope you enjoy this one. Sit back, relax, and let's start. Will, welcome to the PE Insights podcast. Good morning from the UK, and it's the afternoon over in Singapore. How are you?
Hey, Nathan. Yeah, really good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on, and good afternoon.
Great. It's looking forward to having a conversation with you. Thanks for dedicating the time to come on. So let's start and give the listeners a bit of context. What have you been doing? Tell us about your journey, what you're currently doing, what you're up to.
Listening to various other guests that have been on the podcast, it's so great to listen to people's stories. They're so individual and unique, and also I feel like there's so much similarity as well between us. As a kid, I played lots of sport, and I love sport, different sports, and I'd go with my dad and my brother to play at the park, just the three of us. They were really into it as well. Mum was always a taxi driver, taking me everywhere to football mostly, but swimming and any other sports clubs that I was at. So, and that sort of was passion really moving forward through school, and loving PE lessons and joining all the clubs I could. So initially though, decided I was going to go to university to study history, which was a bit of a curveball. And I did sports studies at A-level, but I didn't at the time see a career in sport. So I felt sort of history gave me a bit more flexibility and the sort of skills that were transferable to sort of any future job I wanted. But, having said that, I went through that process and sort of halfway through wasn't enjoying the experience at university. And my parents moved to New Zealand at that time. So that created like an opportunity for me, a fantastic opportunity really just to reset. And sort of I moved out to Wellington with them. And after rejecting a job as a possum poacher, I actually became a schools coordinator for a local football club. So that threw me back into football coaching, sport, and out of the two options, that was definitely the better one. I loved it, being in school, coaching football, playing football. That's all I really wanted to do growing up, and I had the opportunity just by falling into it really, right time, right place, that I was able to do that. So that made me think, how can I make a career out of sport, and sort of be involved in it in a professional capacity. So went back to the UK, did my undergrad, pretty much went into my master's straight after that. Various full part-time jobs to sort of pay for that, coaching football. I lectured at a university for a little bit and worked at a local council in the sport development section, just to pay those bills, particularly university bills. And shortly after I finished my master's at Loughborough, I sort of had the chance to come to Singapore. So I got here and sort of set up a football school for a well-known football club and athletics apparel sort of corporation. And that sort of let me in on sort of the business sort of corporate insight, sort of brand recognition, marketing, comms. While being sort of a coach and going through sort of pedagogically those processes of planning and delivering sessions, designing it, and then reviewing it and reflecting on it. And so I sort of had a really good education in those 12 months or so that I was doing that. First time in Singapore, away from family, I had a great time that first 12 months, but it was just a 12-month contract. So I moved on, did another sort of football role at another academy, and sort of a year and a half later, I joined my current. I did my current sort of role in terms of being a PE teacher at Dulwich College, and I'm in my 10th year here now, working in the early years and lower primary with the PE section, and absolutely loved it. And I've been in my current role as a head of department for the last 4 years. So it's been a huge sort of transformation really in that time. Professionally, it's been a massive learning curve, and I've loved every minute of it. And there's been lows, there's been massive highs, and yeah, I just feel incredibly lucky to be where I am right now and having gone on the journey that I've been on.
Yeah. Amazing. So let's dive into your current role then. So head of early years and lower school PE for Ducks, I think you call it at Dulwich College.
That's it, yeah.
In Singapore. What before we started recording today, we talked a little bit about your values and that your PE curriculum is value driven to meet the needs of like a multicultural and multi-ethnic demographic you've got in the school.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that. What does that look like? What does your PE curriculum look like?
So originally when I joined, it was very much sort of a multi-activity, multi-sport sort of curriculum, something you'd probably see in many schools. And sort of through the COVID sort of years, and just after I sort of then got into sort of the role as sort of head of department, and I was able to sort of facilitate a little bit of change and sort of reflection on that. Was it meeting the needs of the students? Was it age appropriate? Was it something that included all of our children? At the time, pre-COVID, we were very much British heavy in terms of the students that came, and we've diversified a lot since then, and we've got many more nationalities and many more languages that have been spoken amongst the students. So that sort of change in circumstances led to then a deeper sort of reflection and thought around, well, is the curriculum that we're delivering appropriate? Is it sort of something that's wanted by our students, and how are we feeling about delivering that as well? So that sort of change process came in place where we then evolved and hopefully enhanced what we were already delivering. We didn't come up with anything new. We just sort of refigured a lot of the stuff in terms of what were we trying to prioritize. And that's where we thought the values were the priority. The values that we have here are sort of on the back of the acronym. So Dulwich College Singapore, we sort of, our acronym DCSG, we had our values which were about being determined, courageous, skillful and gracious. So we essentially designed units around those four values. So we had four units, and we linked it into a lot of the classroom-based concepts. So things like identity and belonging and innovation, and how we could then sort of bring that into our PE lessons. So there was some curricular, cross-subject sort of learning going on, something that students might be familiar with, but also then vertically as well through the college. How does it link in from where we are in Ducks in the early years and lower primary, then into the junior school and into the sort of senior school part as well. So there's common language there. There's sort of an understanding of, well, okay, this is what makes us Dulwich, and that's part of our identity of being here as staff, as students, as parents. And the sporting experience comes through that and remains strong. So that's where we sort of went through that change period, and it's just continued to evolve since then. We've just tried to that little 5%. I think it's Dave Brailsford that sort of came up with that, where you're looking at those marginal gains, and we've sort of tried to just chip away at that each year. What do we want to keep? What do we need to just sort of drop, what do we need to add in to bring it and enhance it even further? And we get information from different people, students, other staff and colleagues, parents. We try and engage with as many people as we can to get input, and then ultimately try and mold that into something that's manageable and as I said, aspirational.
So I really like the fact that you've aligned the curriculum values with the values of the school. That sounds like a very sensible place to start. And I'm thinking in my head, I could probably imagine what a skillful PE lesson looks like, perhaps maybe more traditional than others. Give us an example of maybe then what students might learn in line with courage. What might their lesson look like if that was one of the values?
So at the moment, we've got being courageous in year 1 and year 2 is one of the main things we're focusing on, and that will be the starting point. We'll have that up on the TV screen, courageous, and we'll sort of try and unpick that each week. And our units are about 9 weeks long, so they're a bit longer than what perhaps traditionally would look at. They're not following the half terms or the terms. It's for us out here, we follow the seasons in Singapore, and the seasons are related to the competitive sport fixtures that happen with it higher up in terms of the college. But it gives us that sort of really nice time period where we can really delve deep into this area. Being courageous is a very abstract word, particularly for young children. They don't really know what that means if they can even say it or read it. You know, it's a difficult thing for them to comprehend. So we just sort of bring it back a little bit, almost to be, well, okay, it could be about being brave. It could be about taking risks. Do we think we can try and do that within our lessons? And we'll intentionally put games out there that are going to create those situations. If it's right now, we're looking at evasion games. So we've played a lot of tag games. So we'll then ask the students, well, okay, what do you feel that you've done to be brave or to take a risk within this game, within this tag game? It might have been trying to save somebody when someone was trying to chase them and tag them. And it's something as simple as that. And then they will reflect on that and discuss that with their friends, within their groups that they're working in. And we'll sort of just keep those ongoing conversations. And if we're able to, we're filming it with an iPad or a camera of some sort, we might then be able to feed some of that footage back in through the TV and say, hey, here's a little illustration of what just happened here. Who else feels like that they've done that in that situation? And gets them thinking, did I do that? Did I not? Maybe I could do that if I wasn't doing it. Just to show and illustrate that element of bravery, of taking a risk, being courageous, and or whatever it means to them in that situation. So we sort of have those ongoing conversations where it might be showing them, feeding back to them, or even allowing them to reflect on it on their own or with others. So and we then start building into, okay, we've done evasion games. Now we're going to look at invasion games. What are some of the differences between the two? How does it change in terms of being courageous? Does it change? Do we still need to be the same and behave the same way or take the same sort of actions? So it's just trying to get that a little bit of deeper thinking behind why are they doing that and how are they doing it, and sort of become that a little bit more, I guess, literate in what they're doing more physically, because our aim is still to be physical as much as possible. We are talking about these sort of big ideas and these big concepts, but we want to be as physical as we can be with the time that we're given, because we are not given much time because the curriculum is so big and that there's so much for them to do, so we have to maximize the time that we have with them.
I love that. I really do. And I guess it takes I'm thinking, like, when we're looking at maybe the development of motor skills and motor competence for PE teachers, it's quite often obvious through observation, but with determination, bravery, taking risks, a lot of that is very personal, isn't it? So it places the emphasis on you as a teacher to do a lot more questioning, a lot more dialogue, and providing opportunities for reflection. Are they core things in your PE lesson as a PE teacher within your department?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you sort of alluded to there, they have to be, because I can't model that practice for them. I can't go in and show them this is what it means to be brave. I am just trying to provoke them, or and sort of say, is that you being brave in that situation? And for that one student, they may have done something where they held back and they sort of said, well, actually, I want to wait a little bit to see and understand it better. For them, they want to just go at a different pace to another student who's happy to just go straight into it, and happy to make mistakes and see what happens, what's the consequence on the back of it. And it allows them to go at that different pace that's personal to them. And hopefully that one of the knock-on effects of that is a confidence. They sort of build their confidence to get into those sort of situations, uncomfortable situations, as much as possible. Whether that's initially straight off, or perhaps in week 3 or 4 when they're a bit more familiar with what's going on.
I like it. Yeah, thanks. That's really cool. So if you think about how the values are kind of spread out throughout the whole curriculum, then you talked about obviously courage being introduced currently to year 1 and year 2. Tell us a little bit about the map and how you came to putting them in different locations.
So in terms of the values, you mean across the year?
Yeah.
So the values, I guess, we were trying to initially align with some of the activities that we were doing. So for us, the courageous part links into, as I mentioned, we're looking at evasion games and invasion games. We'll then look into being gracious following this, because then those sort of 9 weeks, at the end of those 9 weeks, we'll be doing our sports days. And the sports days are done in their houses. They're working with people who are perhaps not their best friends. They're not working with people who they don't know. They're also then competing against other houses, and there's that element of, I want to compete and represent my house as much as possible, but we're trying to integrate that sort of, it's okay to be competitive. Winning and losing is part of sport and sports days generally, but how we do that and how we react to that is really important. And that's something that goes beyond sport. And I think that's a sort of well-documented and well-discussed area. But it's something that we found has to be intentional and explicit. It's not something that just happens. And I think actually if you allow these things to just happen, it can be quite detrimental. And we've sort of seen it in the past where, particularly where you might have students speaking different languages, coming from different cultures, there are different starting points and they're interpreting it in different ways. Whereas we're trying to manage that where we're like, this is sort of a baseline in terms of what we understand it to be at this school. And this is how we would like you to move forward with it, in terms of being gracious. We're talking about being kind or sharing, taking turns, supporting each other and encouraging each other. So that's sort of within your team, but also how you interact with other teams. That's sort of the middle part of the year. And then at the end, we talk about being determined. So we then bring in different sports. Sport's a big part of the PE program at Dulwich. And we sort of try to discuss with them, okay, here are a variety of sports that form our identity as sort of the origins of the school being British-based, but being located in Singapore and internationally focused. Here are what we value as sports, your footballs, your basketballs, your netballs, rugby. But then we are located in Singapore. And what would a Singaporean child of the same age going to a different school experience in their PE program? So we've done our research and looked at what sports they might do, whether it's floorball or ultimate frisbee or whatever. And we then use those sports as well. We play those sports and we talk about the differences and similarities in terms of experience and skill set, but also how uncomfortable it can be to do something you aren't used to doing. So that's where the element of being determined to keep going. And, if you keep trying and practicing, perhaps you will enjoy these sports. And the skills you learn from it will then fit into the ones you already enjoy doing. And that will enhance you and broaden you as a person and as a sort of person who's, physically active or aspiring to continue playing sport later on in, whether it's in school or as an adult. So we're trying to link all of that in together. And that's where we sort of dropped the skillful element a little bit in terms of a value. We've sort of, if we had a model, it would be 3 pillars of being determined, courageous, and gracious. And then skillful underpins all of that because it fits into all the areas. So
you just answered my next question.
Yeah, that's just this year. We've just evolved that from this year, where we've sort of dropped it as a standalone area because, as you said at the start, skillful, probably many PE teachers could sort of look at that and go, yeah, we can run with that. But what we challenged ourselves to do was look at, what skills are there that fit into each of these areas. So no matter what games we are playing, whether it's evasion, invasion, whether it's particular sports, whether it's sort of an activity-based program with our sports days, different sort of activities that are going on, what are the skills that we could use in each of those areas that are common across it? So things like we looked at your timing in terms of how you might be moving, the type of movement you use. Are you being deceptive and things with the way that you play the game? Are you but sticking within the rules? Are you looking and scanning about where you're getting your information from and sort of making decisions on the back of it? So we're looking at these different skills that are perhaps not sport specific. You're not your traditional throwing and catching, but skills that might fit into different games and activities. And essentially, how do we keep that integrated within those 3 other values? So that's sort of where we're at the moment with particularly year 1 and 2. Reception, our nursery and our toddler age groups, we try to set a bit of a foundation in terms of motor skills. So we focus very broadly in terms of your runnings, your jumpings, your landings, perhaps even gymnastics based. We do some cycling. It's just about moving in different ways and developing those motor skills so that when they come up to year 1 and 2, we can then really challenge them further beyond the physical.
Yeah, nice. I really like that, and there's lots to think about there, isn't there? You mentioned floorball, which I was introduced to in Malaysia. What a game that is, by the way. It's so good. I love it. And you talked about the units that you teach, and you talk about evasion and invasion. I wonder if all of your units are like that, or are there units on rugby, basketball in your area? And is that, maybe this is a two-part question, does that change as they move through the school when they go into maybe senior school?
Yeah, so for us, our units are those values. So that unit 1 is courageous, and we then bring in those different types of games. So we won't ever say, we're going to do X amount of weeks on rugby or unit on rugby. As an example, it will be rugby would be perhaps part of the determined unit, and also there will also be football in there, and basketball and netball or captain's ball, and we'll sort of have some perhaps more modified games in there if it's appropriate for the age. But we sort of discuss those sports because children, particularly when we hit year 2, we're finding a lot of them are doing these sorts of sports outside of school at that point. That's the age where they really start to join these clubs and academies. So there's an understanding of it going on there, and we can talk to them a bit more about it. And we know that in the landscape here with the clubs and academies, they're perhaps focusing a lot on your technical and your tactical elements of a game, football or whatever, or in gymnastics and swimming, it's very much the technical aspects, and perhaps not the broader skills. So we can leverage what they already know from a technical point of view and a tactical, and we can try and make an impact. But we can also broaden it to make sure that there are, that I said, the values and other sort of soft skills in there. And in terms of making it sort of how it goes through the school, there's just transition periods where then in year 3 and 4 they'll still have an element of the games that we're playing. So there's some familiarity going on there, but there's opportunities for the students to compete competitively for the college and go on various trips and tours when they're in the senior school. So it starts to become a bit more sport specific, but there's elements of choice within that. So there's options, and we sort of try to structure it in terms of, or my colleagues do in those respective areas, they try to look at sort of the competitive and the developmental aspects. So if we're looking at a particular sport, would this child be better in the competitive sort of side of it because they have that the skill set already or the understanding already, and they aspire to be within the competitive teams? Or is it something where we just want to introduce it and see what they can do and see if there's a few other skills that they can take away, and that's obviously fits into the development aspect. So and that then, as they go up to the senior school, obviously exams take a big sort of priority there, and just keeping those children engaged and making sure that they are given opportunity to do something they like. We just try to provide those options for them and keep them engaged, because they're being pulled in many different directions, and there's an understanding that it's going to be challenging for them as well as for the teachers. Yeah, brilliant.
That's really clear. You talked about earlier that you get information from lots of people in terms of developing your curriculum, and one of the stakeholders you mentioned was the parents. Now, in a multicultural, multi-ethnic community that you will be working in, the different perspectives of physical education are huge, aren't they? I'm talking from experience of work in Southeast Asia as well.
Yeah.
And I guess as they move through the school, the perspectives of the parents might change slightly. What have you faced any tensions, and what maybe the community thinks PE should look like in Singapore, and particularly with your school having maybe that image of a British private school, and maybe what they expect? What are some of the tensions you felt?
From my sort of, I guess, area of the school, that in terms of lower down with the age group, there's not really been any tension. There's always been, I've only ever felt support from the parents, and I think that's come from different ways in terms of being open to communicating with them, and then the sort of team, I guess, that everyone was sort of happy to chat and just talk this through. And there's a two-way conversation going here. We'll listen as much as we'll sort of talk. There's also an element of the students, the children themselves, seemingly enjoying what they do, and sort of relaying that information. I think that any parent, parents, us, both of us are parents, and I think if you know that your child is enjoying what they do, you're always going to be happy with that and encouraging that as much as possible. So I think there's an element of that as well, and trying to make sure that the children are happy and they love what they do and they want to come to the lesson every week. Because, as I said, we're very limited on time. Reception year 1 and 2, we'll see them, once a week for 1 hour, and that will be it. So if they miss any of their lessons, we're sort of really trying to catch them up as much as possible or keep them engaged. So that's always one of the challenges. And so that enjoyment's got to be there, and to sort of keep them engaged, but also then to relay that to parents. And I think just making sure that we're communicating where we can what's going on in lessons. We use Seesaw, and we've got a new sort of platform where we are looking to make the sort of communication experience more personalized. And so that's sort of from a student and parent perspective. What are you learning, but also what is going on in terms of the content of the lesson? So we've been communicating recently about, we're being courageous, and these are some of the games and activities that we're playing. Have some discussions around the dinner table at home about it. What is it you've enjoyed, and what is it you've learned from it? And those sort of key takeaways, I think those sort of little drops that keep going on throughout the year, that's a really important process that takes a bit of time in a sort of environment where time is precious, but those things can make a difference. And I think that's where we get a lot of the goodwill from the parents and a lot of support from them, as well as the kids. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. So I think it's probably about time we move towards celebrating your recent achievement of your PhD. Huge congratulations, by the way, Doctor.
Thank you so much.
So you, I know, I'm not quite there yet, but I know it's a huge task. So well done. I think listening to you talk about your value-driven PE curriculum makes a lot of sense in terms of your topic for your PhD. So maybe if you can, let's kind of summarize what it was you looked into and maybe what you found from doing that.
Okay. Summarizing a PhD is always tricky. 270 odd pages, I think I had, and about 70,000 words. And it was quite an experience. The sort of topic I was looking at was around examining the affective domain in PE, primary PE particularly. I used some year 2 students and classes to sort of collect data. So it's obviously a large area, but such I felt important area that needed more attention to it. It's an area that I think so many people want to know more about and are trying to find out, what goes on in that space. So for me, the project and the study itself was grounded really in the contemporary issues that are faced by young people. So I'm talking very broadly and obviously very sort of not within Singapore, but globally perhaps, that health and well-being is a massive topic and a massive area of concern for young people. And there's a whole load of studies and that have been done in this area. They focus mainly in the sort of secondary and sort of senior areas of students age-wise. So, and there's a whole host of reasons why, young people's health and well-being is being affected, whether it's environmental challenges or advances in communication and digital technology and economic instability. These sort of areas are impacting on these young people and adults as well. We could probably branch it out to the whole place. So health and well-being really prominent, and that was something that really sort of hooked me in as part of the study. And I just wanted to sort of look at it. Well, if there's all these sort of studies being done in areas around, secondary students, a lot of the studies were around 11 year olds and up, which is obviously concerning in itself. But it sort of made me think, well, if we were to do these studies with children in younger age groups in primary school, would we find similar results or not? And I think that was sort of part of my sort of thought process going into this in a deeper way. So, the affective domain in particular aligns well with what UNESCO put out with their policy paper for policymakers. So, in the guidelines they listed, and that was in 2015. So, almost 10 years ago now that they use that as sort of part of a quality PE program is holistic. It has, physical elements and cognitive and social and affective. So, and there's been all these calls around, exploring the affective domain more and the need to look at it, but not really those steps taken further. So, I just wanted to, help sort of contribute and fill those gaps a little bit. And such an important area, but also, if we are to prevent these sort of trends that are occurring from increasing and becoming more problematic, well, a subject like PE in school is perfectly placed to address it. At least it's been positioned that way by many people, whether it's PE teachers or sort of school leaders or government ministers. People are sort of identifying PE as a way to address these issues. But then, what are the challenges around that, and what are the things what actually happens in practice already? We also need an audit of ourselves that, are we not actually doing the best we can do already and making the biggest impact we can? And I think that's exploring that a little bit further, particularly within my own context. It was really, it was a great process to go through that and try and sort of reflect on that sort of background, I guess, within the academic literature, and also what I was seeing within the school itself. So,
what were some of the practical sort of solutions then that you kind of explored or unpacked? What can PE teachers do to maybe support, nurture, develop the affective domain with young people?
Well, one of the things that PE teachers, I think, could probably do is define what they think the affective domain is. Anyone that I think reads, particularly from academic literature, you could find so many different definitions of it. I think if you went through other domains of learnings, physical or cognitive, you'd probably find a lot of similarities between them in terms of defining it. But the affective domain, from my reading on the subject, it was very diverse. It included lots of different areas. It made the affective domain very broad and hard to pin down. So what is it we're actually looking at here? A lot of work recently, particularly with David Kirk and some of his sort of students and colleagues, has focused very much on motivation. So they used sort of the self-determination theory as sort of a theoretical framework to look at the affective domain. So there's a lot around the psychological aspects, and motivation being one of them. And these are, really valuable in terms of understanding it from a theoretical perspective. And then what they've tried to do is look at pedagogy. So pedagogy of effect. What are the pedagogies that can support the affective domain? From my side, I wanted to expand that a little bit more as a definition. I wanted to include feelings and emotions within that. I think that was an area that was missing, and but still, really important in terms of what you might see in a lesson. So I essentially looked at regular situations that occurred where there were gaps in learning, from 12 video recorded lessons that I sort of took. And there were things around the rules and the tasks and the relationships of students within those lessons. They were the common sort of factors that came up. So anything to do with sort of a rule change or a rule that was put in place that students then started to break quite often because they were trying to win the game, for example, that created emotional responses and expressive feelings that then might cause conflict, or these different indicators that came up, disappointment, frustration, whatever it was. And they were the observable parts of that then. So we were then I was able to look at, okay, I can see these sort of little moments when I zoom into these sort of interactions or sort of these micro interactions, and then sort of after noting that, sort of pull back a little bit and go, okay, so where are they occurring regularly throughout these lessons, and sort of where are sort of the big pinch points? So that's where I got these sort of rule changes, what the task was and how it was set, and then the relationships in terms of how the students were grouped together and how they interacted with each other, whether they were with their friends or were they with people they didn't really know, and how that sort of learning process progressed, I guess. So I think that was sort of an interesting point. And then sort of linked into David Kirk's work, and I said some of his colleagues that he's done this with, and the pedagogies of affect are very much around student-centered, student voice, that autonomy aspect when it comes to the self-determination theory. But what I sort of found through these observations was a little bit of that. Student voice is important and a bit of autonomy, but there's also that sort of teacher as activator of learning. So John Hattie's work, where the teacher is still important in these processes. And there needs to be that balance. And it's very much the sort of, the skill and the experience of the teacher is really important in this situation, knowing when to allow students to have that autonomy, or knowing when to not give them the autonomy because they just need a bit of direction and a bit of support. Sometimes really we need to give that information. Sometimes we can let them go and find it themselves. And I think that having that balance and understanding is really important. And there's no hard and fast rules to any of that, is it? It's so contextual, it's so personal. And that's why I think, going back to sort of the beginning and why did I look at the affective domain, it's so complex, it's so multifaceted, it's so, the learning process is non-linear. You might take a step forward with a student and they might take 2 steps back before they then move forward again. And it's never a sort of straight line trajectory in terms of their learning. So, and that makes it hard to observe as a practitioner. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah,
it really is. I love it. And obviously I talk quite regularly about self-determination theory and motivation, and that's something that I like to explore. But I think what you mentioned earlier about belonging and identity as well, me just thinking now, and as we're talking, perhaps that influences the affective domain, the motivation, feelings, emotions, but then belonging and identity are perhaps key to all of those things.
Absolutely.
So I wonder whether anything from your PhD are you going to take forward, if you haven't already, and make changes in your practice or in your curriculum design?
So I think the sort of evolution I started, off the discussion with around the values being the priority, and discussing that explicitly and intentionally. I think that's one of the big sort of changes in my practice off the back of this study. There were a few areas that were found enabled the affective domain, I guess, in terms of modified games, and identifying the importance of well-being and PE and the association that they have together. I think those were facilitators of the affective domain that were really important. But then also understanding that there's a balance as well with that physical element, that the physical domain has always been a barrier to other areas of learning, such as the affective domain. But and it's always going to be important. But how do you integrate that, and how do you balance it in a way that you don't sort of neglect or remove any of the physical stuff? Because usually that can be the way to hook students in and hook children into the lesson, being active and physical. But you want to broaden those learning experiences, and the affective domain, it lends itself really well to that. But so I think that would be sort of one of the first starting points. But also the other part would be around pedagogy and just understanding what influences the student learning in those areas. So for me, there was sort of 3 main areas. There was the sort of the students with their peers. So the interactions they would have with their peers and how that influenced them effectively. And then the teacher. So for me in this study, it was mainly me as a teacher researcher, the interactions they had with me. And for example, if there was a student that was breaking a rule, usually in the videos, I would be the main person who they'd come to solve the problem, in terms of I'm the judge and I'm the jury and all of that sort of thing. So that
Teacher
caused
is
a
the
lot.
official.
That caused a lot of reflection on my part as I'm watching this, going, wow, is that really what happened? I had always had this impression that I gave them a little bit of opportunity to figure it out themselves, but perhaps I hadn't given them the tools to do that, and I hadn't figured out how to be, they could be compassionate to one another and support each other and be empathetic or kind in those situations. Like, okay, well, someone's broken a rule, but why have they done it? Can you figure it out? And here's how you might do it. But because of the time, or because of I've had a bad day, and I'm like, wow, okay, fine. You've broken the rules, so you just sit there for a second while you guys carry on, and let's have a little chat, and then you get back in the lesson. And that sort of out of body experience, because I'm watching myself on those videos, that was really, I think, important. And then the last part was around the physical environment itself. If we're in an environment that's a sports hall, for example, it's designed for a certain purpose in terms of being sport specific. So if we are playing modified games, we're going to have to try and manipulate that space in a certain way that allows us to be a bit more creative and maybe break away from, your lines on the floor and your certain, goals and nets and baskets and things. So how you do that is really important, I think, to sort of influence the affective domain, but also perhaps incorporate it and integrate it in a way. Otherwise, it will just be about sport and being physical, and that will always be the dominant part. So, there's these different areas pedagogically that will influence, I think, a teacher and a student experience.
Brilliant. Loads to think about there, Will. I love that. And perhaps maybe a conversation for another time about that. I'm interested about the modified games and how that impacts the affective domain. I'd love to talk about that a little bit further. Let's move on to our quick fire questions. Really, really fascinating reflection so far. And I know I gave these to you prior to the conversation. So if you still haven't got an answer for some of the tricky ones, it's absolutely fine. Right. But let's start with your 3 non-negotiables to ensure positive experiences in PE for all students, all learners.
Non-negotiables. I'm always thinking about how can I make it valuable, meaningful, and enjoyable for the students. I think that's always the starting point in terms of making sure that I'm trying to engage students somehow. There's an element of safety that's always part of that as well, making sure students are safe. And that's something we talk a lot about with the early years foundation stage students, personal safety and safety amongst friends. But I think, it's just got to be, so something that's understanding what's valuable to those students, where they're going to get that meaning from, and sort of the enjoyment aspect has to be there. There has to be some sort of hook. And usually I think from my experience, it's around being physically active, just letting them go and express themselves physically is a great starting point. And then you can build from there.
I think you got 3 there. I'll give you a tick for that one.
Thanks.
So the next one, if you had a motto, what would it be?
Be confident. I think for students and for teachers, be confident. Know your strengths and use them. Go with the strengths-based approach, not what could I do better. So be confident, know your strengths.
I like it. Okay, next one. If you could give PE teachers one thing, what would it be?
I would, there'd be many things I'd love to give myself and other teachers, PE teachers, but I think understanding more about the affective domain would be really helpful for all of us. I still feel there's so much more for me to know about it and to unpack. And I think having those practical tools to integrate it into a quality PE program will be really important. And there's many people doing some great work in the area already. And I think just reaching out and hearing what those people are doing will really be, a great step forward.
Superb. And then the final one is, do you have a question for our next guest?
This is a tricky one. I think what impact do you feel you've already made in PE would be a really great starting point in terms of, where are you at? What have you done? Do you think you've done so far? So what impact do you feel you've already made in PE? That would be my question.
Nice, good. I'll jot that one down and that will go on the list. Will, it's been an absolute pleasure having a chat this morning. Thank you for letting us know a little bit about your PE provision in Singapore and talking us through your PhD and your passion for the affective domain. It's made me think a lot, and I'm sure I'll be continuing to think for the rest of the day. Thanks for coming on this morning.
Thanks, Nathan. Absolute privilege. Keep up the great work.